Hey guys, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to take a look at this 300 amp hour 12 volt lithium iron phosphate battery. It's from a company called Okmo Tech. And this is a new name for me. I'm not really familiar with these guys, but I wanted to take a look at this because this battery was really well priced, very much budget value priced, and it includes low temp cutoff protection. And we're going to get inside after we run it through some performance tests, and we're going to see what's on the inside and find out what this thing is all about. But as you can see, it's rated for 300 amp hours of capacity, and that equates to, at 12.8 volts, 3,840 watt hours. I'm kind of looking at the manual with the battery parameters, and it says that it does have a 150 amp BMS, that its standard discharge current is 75 amps, recommended charge current is 30 amps. And the manual does say that it is rated for 4,000 cycles at 100% depth of discharge. Now, 6,000 cycles at 80% depth of discharge. The manual does give you the parameters for your charge controllers if you need to program it. Some of the other specs, the maximum continuous charge current rating on this is 150 amps. The maximum continuous discharge, as you would expect with 150 amp BMS, is 150 amps. Now, the maximum continuous output power is 1,920 watts. Now, this thing weighs in at just a hair under 64 pounds. In terms of dimensions, it's 20.59 inches from the side handles to the other side handles. And then it is 10.6 inches deep in this direction right here. And it is 8.58 inches tall. So let me go grab my tape measure and make sure that that height actually includes the studs. Yeah, it's about 9 3/8 up to maybe 9.5 if you were to stack a couple of ring terminals on there. So call it 9.5 inches high to the top of the studs. Now it does come with an extra set of 10 millimeter studs, and it has a couple of insulator caps. Now the BMS does support up to 4S 4P configuration, so a total of 16 of these in a 48 volt battery configuration. And I think that's about all we can get into in terms of specs. So let me get this thing hooked up to my test apparatus here. And we're going to first make sure we do a capacity test, see what kind of capacity we actually pull out of this. We're going to use a smart shunt for that. And then we are going to do a load test and make sure that this thing can handle the load. Then we're going to get inside and see what this how the construction is on this particular battery. And we're also going to do a low temp cutoff test. And then we'll wrap up with some final comments. So let me get this thing hooked up and we'll get to it. All right, let's do our capacity test on this Okmo 300 amp hour battery. So just to explain my setup here, I've got a smart shunt connected over here to the negative terminal, and that is what's feeding the information on my tablet here. You can see we're reading 13.93 volts. So this thing came off the charger about an hour ago. And so it's settled a little bit. I don't think it's quite done settling. But I've also got these feeding into a 2000 watt inverter over there. And I've got the inverter connected to a couple of variable charge power stations. Now we want to basically try to discharge this at sort of using an industry standard 0.2C discharge rate. So 0.2C times 300 amp hours would give me 60 amps, and then 60 amps times 12.8 volts would give me about a discharge rate of about 768 watts. Now the reason I have my battery tester here is that I know that my inverter will actually shut off due to low voltage disconnect before the BMS cuts off. So once my inverter shuts off, I want this thing to finish it out. So at the very end there, we won't be discharging at 0.2C anymore, but that's okay. I just want to get it close. So let's go ahead and start the discharge and see if we can get this thing very close to 60 amps. So I'm going to go ahead and enable my inverter, and we'll give it a second, and let me zoom in here on the amps. All right, so we are already at 59.3 amps. So let me go ahead and start the battery tester and see if that puts us right at about 60 amps. So I'm pulling 2 amps on the battery tester, knock that down to 1 amp, and that gets us very close to that 0.2C discharge rate. All right, this should take something like 5 hours. So we are going to let this thing run until the internal BMS actually stops discharge, and then we're going to see how many amp hours and watt hours we actually caught. I will check back in the morning and see where we end up. All right, our capacity test looks like it is done. The BMS is clearly no longer allowing discharge from the battery. And if I look at my tester over here, I have only pulled 92 watt hours from my little battery tester. So it did not consume very much of the overall capacity. And that's the only reason I'm pointing that out. So we'll have to connect the smart shunt up to some power so we can actually read, reconnect via Bluetooth and read what the history shows on the overall amp hours and watt hours. So let me go ahead and add a charger. So let me go ahead and do that and we'll see what we end up with. All right, now I've gone ahead and removed the connections for the DC tester here, and I've added my clamps for my battery charger. So let me go ahead and plug the battery charger in. And that'll get us cooking. So this should reestablish a Bluetooth connection pretty quick, and it did. All right, let's go look at the history. All right, zoomed in here, taking a look at the history. We're showing 3.2 amp hours and a discharge of 3.8 kilowatt hours. So we are definitely outputting within the advertised capacity, and actually just a little bit more than that. So let me get this thing fully charged back up, and we're gonna do a load test and see if we can handle that 150 amp continuous discharge rate. All right, we're doing a load test on this Okmo Tech battery with its rated 150 amp sustained continuous output on the BMS, and we are at 149.53 amps right now. We're gonna go ahead and start this. This has actually been running for a couple of minutes, but I'm gonna go ahead and start the timer now, see if it will sustain that for a full 10 minutes. All right, we are actually several seconds past 10 minutes. So 10-minute test definitely passed on the 150 amp load. In fact, we were at a little bit, just a hair over that, 151 amps. So let me take the timer away and reset that. Let's try and push this thing and see how far we can get it before the BMS actually shuts us down. Yeah, I think I'll go ahead and put a timer up just so we can see how much time we're actually burning here. We're at 168 amps. So out of that rated 150 amp BMS, we're discharging at 201 amps. We're 1 minute in, and we are now at 215 amps. Now we're hearing the AC inverter fans kick on. We are over 2 minutes. Take it up a little further, 269 amps, 283. Here we are at 313. And it looks like we just got shut off. But I think we actually exceeded the load on one of the AC inverters. So let me back that down. All right, well, I think we're gonna have to let it sit right here at around 270 amps. That's still 120 amps overrated, coming up on 7 minutes. When is this BMS gonna actually shut us down? At this point, I'm starting to get a little concerned about the fuse that I have on the positive terminal. That fuse is in danger of blowing at this point. And as the voltage is slowly dropping, our current is rising, so we're now at 273 amps. All right, I'm going to let this go for... Did we drop? Yes, we just finally dropped. So we got 8 full minutes out of this thing at significantly over that 150 amp rating. So I'm kind of curious, now that I've removed the load, if this thing will re-enable itself or not. I'll check back with you in a little bit and we'll see if that's the case. All right, I had pretty much gone all the way around the seam of this top lid with my oscillating tool before I discovered that there were actually some 8 screws here, 4 on each side, kind of hidden under little covers that I was able to pry out with a small screwdriver. So they were very well camouflaged, and I didn't even notice them. So I would have been prying this thing until the cows came home and without taking these screws out. So I finally did loosen all the screws. I had to go back over because there still was a lot of glue in there, and I finally got this cover off. So let's go ahead and take a look inside. All right, one of the first things I notice is that there's a pretty fair amount of empty space in this case. So it tells me that I'm sure that they probably have a mini version that takes up a lot less overall volume. But in this non-mini version, I've got about 2.5 inches of space on either the right and the left side. And then on the top and bottom here, I have got something like on one side about 1/2 inch, on the other side about 1 inch. So let me kind of take it in there a little further. Right here's a slightly better top-down view. So lots of space on the left and right. And then the tops of the terminals are down here facing the front of the battery case. So we're gonna have to take these out. I think there's 4 screws on this metal bracket. I do notice that there are fiber board here dividing all 4 of these cells. So that's good. And from what I can see from this angle, the bus bars are laser welded onto the battery terminal. So let me go ahead and remove this metal bracket, and we'll see if we can get these cells all the way out of there and identify the QR codes and see what these cells are actually rated for and when they were manufactured. All right, I've got the battery cells exposed here on the top, and I can make out the QR codes, and if I can give you a close-up on this, they appear to be etched over. So they're like the serial numbers are actually scratched out, and there is a B over top of these. So clearly these are not grade A cells, and I guess I'm not surprised given the price of this battery. All right, so I was able to take some extreme close-ups of these QR codes, and at least for 3 out of 4 of them, I was able to decode them with the information that I could just barely make out. And what I found out is these are actually Eve manufactured cells, and they are clearly grade B because they're etched as grade B. And I think Eve started doing this sometime in 2022 to prevent people from selling them as grade A cells. So they actually etch them from the factory if they don't meet the grade A standard. But I think even more of a little bit of a concern for me is the fact that the age of those, at least the 3 of the 4 that I could determine, was 2 of them were November 2023, 1 of them was December 2023. So that puts them at coming up on close to 2 years old. And even if they were grade A cells, if they're 2 years old, been sitting on the shelf, they're probably going to be downgraded to grade B anyway. So grade B is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself if they are carefully matched and paired up with other grade B cells and thoroughly tested. You can still get pretty good useful life out of grade B cells, but typically grade B cells will naturally degrade their usable capacity faster over time than grade A cells. And they may not put out as much power, although in our power test, our load test, we did see that these particular grade B cells can accommodate that full 150 amps and then some. So in that sense, these grade B cells are performing just fine. But you know, when you're buying grade B cells, you need to know you're buying grade B cells and you're not think you're buying grade A cells. So I'm a little concerned about that. So I'll do a little bit more research into this. Now, in the meantime, I did manage to isolate the low temp probe right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and test this thing for the low temp cutoff to see if that actually works as planned. It's not a super scientific test because I can't really verify the actual temperature that I'm exposing this probe to. I can really just verify whether or not it cuts off at extreme low temperature or not. So let's see how that works. All right, I have got my 40 amp battery charger over here. There is a little LED light right down there, which we'll keep our eye on. Let's go ahead and see if it will begin charging, as it should. Go ahead and turn that thing on. And we have a nice bright green light over here, switching to red, telling me that it is now charging. So let's go ahead and apply some extreme cold to this and see if it stops charging. And it cut off. So we went from red to green. I heard the charger cut off. So let's go ahead and take the probe back out. Let's give it a second, see if it will automatically resume charging. Go ahead and warm it with my hand. That is pretty cold. And it resumes charging. So low temp cutoff protection is a pass. Let's see if this will also do high temp. So let me get my heat gun out and we'll test it with high temp. And it did. So charging cutoff as we applied heat. So this single probe acts as both a low temp cutoff and a high temp cutoff. And it automatically resumed charging. So both low temp and high temp cutoff is a definite pass. All right, so let's wrap up with some things that I like and some things that I don't like. So first of all, the build quality is surprisingly decent. The laser welded bus bars have a little expansion joint on them if there's any swelling. The batteries have insulating board between all the cells, and everything seems to be tightened down and then siliconed to keep it in place, to keep it from disconnecting or causing a short or something like that. Low temperature protection, the cutoff protection works fine. You're actually getting the advertised 300 amp hours of capacity, at least for now. The 150 amp BMS gives you the full 150 amps and then some. And then it does also shut down after about 8 minutes if you dramatically exceed that 150 amps. So all of that is actually pretty good, especially when you consider the price of just $455. But, and this is a big but.
I like big butts and I cannot lie.
I have a pretty significant issue because even though in the main description of this product on both their website and on Amazon, they don't really tell you whether it's grade A or grade B. If you scroll down far enough into the graphics and things that are associated with the product description, you will definitely see where they say EV grade, grade A battery cells. And that is not what you're getting. And I think, as I alluded to before, there's nothing inherently wrong with grade B cells, provided you're being upfront with that's what you're getting. And if you're being able to offset the price significantly enough to justify the potential reduction in long-term service life and capacity as a result. And at $455, this is probably one of the cheapest 300 amp hour 12 volt lithium iron phosphate batteries that I've seen, but it is cheapest by about 10 or 12% max. And while that is a $45, $55 savings or so, depending on what other brand you're looking at, I'm not sure if that is sufficient to offset the fact that these are in fact grade B cells and not grade A cells. So I think for my money, I would rather pay the extra 10% or 20 or 25% for that matter, and knowing that I'm getting grade A cells. You may feel differently, but that's just my opinion. And I think it's important that for a company to be honest about what they are selling. And I did reach out to Okmo Tech with this finding to get their side of the story. And at least as the time when I'm posting the video, they've not yet responded. It's been a little over a week and I've not heard back. So I don't know if I will hear back. If I do hear back, I will post the essence of their position on this down in the comments section. I'll pin a comment with that. But yeah, anyway, hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please consider giving me a thumbs up. I'd very much appreciate that. And I do appreciate the time you spent watching this video with me today. And I hope you'll consider coming back and joining me for the next one. Until then, have fun out there.